Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Tuesday, it's April 15th of 2025, and today is day 557 since October 7th of 2023. I wanted to talk a little bit before I start giving the 24-hour update of the news about some of the things I did today. I spent much of the day on the border with Gaza in the Gaza envelope. It's called in Israel proper. I was there about a year ago. The Israeli gentleman today who accompanied us is a theologian and a New Testament scholar, and he's a part of what's called the shrinking left. And one of the realities today is all of these tensions where, he opposes the war and opposes the occupation of the Palestinian people, and yet his son's in the Israeli military, and he's a medic and was just injured, in some of the fighting. And so these juxtapositions that just feel like, for me, and I'm not even Israeli or Palestinian, but I could just see it tearing people apart, let alone communities apart. And today I spent much of my time and several hours in the kibbutz, Kfar Aza. I've been there before. I was hosted by a man who lived through the attacks of the militants that day. And I really want to challenge us to hold the tensions of what does it mean to acknowledge the atrocities of what happened that day, which were a crime against God, and what is going on in Gaza every single day and the West Bank every single day, and to work against the dehumanization of Palestinians and all of these other things that are also true. And that's really, really hard to do. And so I'm going to press into that as I go through some of these updates today. One of the things that really struck me, as I say often, the October 7th attacks were not targeting Jews specifically. People were killed that day who were Jewish Israelis, internationals, Bedouins, Palestinians, citizens of the state of Israel, Arabic speakers. And that's true. That's absolutely true. But I think it's also really important to acknowledge that for many who are extremists or militants or, committing acts of terror, they don't necessarily differentiate or separate. And so there is a hatred of Jewish people that is also associated with the state of Israel. And so while I'm differentiating, I heard some stories today about people being killed on October 7th, and then some of the celebrations that happened and some of the things that were said that were absolutely, anti-Semitism doesn't summarize it. And I think holding that intention that the actions of, militants, I can't speak to their intentions by any means, but just that specific dynamic, I think is really important to try to understand more. I'm trying to understand it more. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things I saw and learned. The Nova Music Festival, I've talked about this before, that was the place of the most significant number of deaths. And it was a bloodbath. 384 people were killed. 169 were killed in and around the area. So that's in addition to that 384. And another 232 people died while trying to escape. 44 people who participated in the Nova Music Festival were kidnapped and then taken hostage to Gaza. Today, 59 hostages remain, and it's believed that somewhere between 21 and 24 of them are still alive. We at Churches for Middle East Peace are calling for their release. We desire for them to be returned to their families. They've suffered horrors beyond our imagination over the last 557 days. And we continue to call for the release of the thousands of Palestinians who have been held unjustly in Israeli prisons. And I was just talking today about how, that is a horror and a trauma, and how all of these things are true. From the time we arrived at the kibbutz today, or at least shortly thereafter, we began to hear different sounds of war. Now, this doesn't typically happen every day, but today was a day where along the enclave, the sounds of bombs were very clear. You could hear artillery. There were, at least in a course of 90 minutes, for example, 8 to 10 blasts. Some were smaller, some were larger. There was intermittent artillery fire that could be heard in the distance. And I don't know how to differentiate these different types of sounds, but I did know that there were weapons of death all around. And it makes the hostilities and the things that we're talking about so much more real. And I kept thinking and praying every time I would hear one of these noises for the people in Gaza who are on the receiving end of those weapons of death. And last night, we were told, was one of the loudest nights in terms of bombs since October 7th. Members of the kibbutz said that. And I kept thinking how traumatized these poor children in Gaza have to be, having day after day and month after month of these. I can't express. I remember being in Gaza in 2022. I was supposed to go in 2023, but it was after October 7th. Just the sounds of the drones are enough. They're just constant. And how that actually has physiological effects, let alone psychological ones. We've heard it said that children often in Gaza since October 7th will say that they would rather die than be injured, and that when they go to sleep, they don't know if they will wake up in the morning. I want to talk for a minute about what happened at Kfar Aza on October 7th. On the morning of the Hamas attacks, the first Hamas fighters infiltrated the kibbutz at 6 a.m. By 8:30 a.m., 36 people had already been murdered. Some of the fighters were dressed as Israeli military, and the only way to tell them apart was because of the types of guns they were using. Hamas fighters use older weapons that are out of commission in the Israeli military. There were 14 men who served on the civilian guard who were the front line, and they fought against 100 Hamas and other militants, and they were all killed. By 6 p.m., 64 people in the kibbutz had been killed, 19 people had been kidnapped, and there were 500 militants who had come through and were present in the kibbutz. About that time, roughly 1,000 soldiers arrived, but they were not coordinated in their response, so there was chaos. The main person who communicated security alerts to the people in the kibbutz had already been killed, and so there was very little communication between the members of the kibbutz and between these different units of the army. And our host today, he told us about being in a bomb shelter for 30 hours. He left a few times when different members of the kibbutz asked if he would check on his neighbor's wife, who was his wife's best friend. And when he checked on her, he found her to be dead. So he had to return to the bomb shelter without being discovered by the Hamas fighters who were present, and to tell his wife the news that her best friend had died. He said she just sobbed, and he told her, this was not the time to cry, because crying could be detrimental, could lead to their discovery. It wasn't until 6 p.m. on October 8th, the next day, Sunday, that members of the kibbutz started to be evacuated. At least 300 militants died in the kibbutz. Most of the members still have not returned today. There's less than 24 people living there, but there's volunteers and soldiers and others who stay there. So any day there could be 50, 60, 100 people, who might be there for the day or overnight. Before October 7th, there were 980 people. The whole time we were talking, every few minutes, you could hear a small explosion or a loud bomb, at least at various different times throughout the day. Between 11:03 and 11:15 a.m., there were 8 different explosions, small and large. Of the 19 people kidnapped in the kibbutz, 2 twins in their late 20s, Zvi and Gali, remain in Gaza. It's believed they still may be alive. They're the last 2 hostages yet to return from Kfar Gaza. The man hosting us told us harrowing stories of being stuck in the bomb shelter. He told us that his response to Hamas would have been, "You came and tried to kill me, but we've returned and we're rebuilding our lives. We just want to live in peace with our neighbors. We want for the Palestinians what we want for ourselves, security and peace. That will not come from war. Instead, we are just growing another generation of enemies the longer this war continues." So after all of this, his main point was this war must be brought to an end. Some of the questions, some may question, why am I spending so much time talking about this? And that's fair when, Gaza is continuing to be bombed, and the situation there is where death continues each and every day. And I want to share the stories of all the stories I can share from Gaza City to Rafah, while recognizing that as the kibbutzim strive to rebuild, Gaza is still facing relentless devastation. In every explosion that echoes in my mind, a silent prayer, might God save the people of Gaza. Our hearts feel torn, for the suffering of one does not diminish the pain of another. So might we collectively care for and respond to every child, every person, and every story emerging from Gaza, just as we do for the hostages still missing and for those who lost their lives in Israel. Let us unite in the belief that the more and more death will not offer relief, nor will revenge suffice, but it will only deepen our collective anguish. So that's my prayer for today. I've not given you much news for today, and I have so much of it. Let me just try to summarize it quickly. In Gaza, over the last 24 hours, I got an alert from an NGO group that 3 different schools in Gaza were being targeted. They had received evacuation orders. I received a notice that at least the first one of the 3 had been bombed in Gaza. At 6 p.m. tonight, the military spokesperson, Abu Obaida, communicated, "We announced that we have lost contact with the group capturing the soldier Idan Alexander following a direct bombardment targeting their location. We're still trying to reach them." So I'm a bit confused if they knew that Idan Alexander was there, why they were bombing the direct location, but they've lost contact with that group, and there's a big concern because what's it mean about the future of Idan Alexander? He's the American Israeli hostage, and rumor here has it he's the reason that the Americans kind of pulled out of the ceasefire agreement. The latest round of Cairo-mediated talks to restore the Gaza ceasefire and free Israeli hostages ended with no apparent breakthrough. Hamas later said that they'll study a proposal. They're going to send a delegation to Qatar. So there's been no breakthrough in terms of a ceasefire. Conditions in Gaza hospitals are beyond description, said the World Health Organization. Attack after attack after attack. Hospitals, healthcare workers amid medical supplies reaching critically low levels. Today, Prime Minister Netanyahu was in North Gaza, as was his army chief, Eyal Zamir. They were in the enclave, planning more attacks with top commanders. They were in Shujaiya, which is a neighborhood of Gaza City. And eyewitnesses told Al Jazeera throughout the day today that homes are being demolished, not only to prevent people from returning to their homes now, but so that in the future they won't have shelter, making conditions unlivable in order for people to leave. Fighter jets, drones, and military helicopters were involved in strikes throughout the morning and patrolling the entire eastern area, the area around the Netzarim quarter and Han Yunis in the south. That must have been what we heard. Most recently in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, close to the Al-Aqsa hospital, that's our Anglican hospital that was bombed on Sunday, a Palestinian who was working on a rooftop doing maintenance on an internet network point he was operating on was targeted and killed. An hour ago, Middle East, so that was about 8:30 in Jerusalem, Israeli military green-lighted a plan to continue the Gaza attacks and to maintain and increase their intensity, especially in North Gaza. We know also that Hamas released a video on Gaza captives today telling people to be prepared. It warned that after the loss of contact with the group that was holding Idan Alexander, they released a video. This is the armed wing of Hamas. They said, "Be prepared. Soon your children will return to black coffins with their bodies torn apart by shrapnel from your army's missiles." That was the Qassam Brigade's video, which was accompanied by footage from a previous handover of Israeli captives' remains in coffins to the international community of the Red Cross. Your leadership has signed the decision to execute the prisoners in the Gaza Strip, referring to the hostages. Hamas called for a global week of demonstrations to end the Gaza war. They said that the attacks are barbaric Zionist aggression. And in Israel, the army chief Eyal Zamir warned Netanyahu of depleted manpower. Israel is having trouble keeping soldiers, having enough soldiers. He said this threatens his ability to be able to meet the political objectives of the war, while at the same time within Israeli society, there's been intensified resistance against the war. 3,500 academics, 3,000 education workers, 1,000 parents, and 1,500 armored corps soldiers signed petitions demanding an end to the war that serves personal and political interests. I learned today 70% of Israelis support a deal to return the hostages and end the war. There was also a national democratic gathering at al-Fam, which strongly condemned the brutal raid that was carried out today by Shin Bet, the police intelligence forces, on the home of Raja Igbaria, a leader of the Abna Abalad movement. It's a political movement in Israel. There were several items confiscated. So that's an internal arrest of a politician, a Palestinian politician in Israel. In the occupied West Bank, settlers attacked and beat up a Palestinian man. They stole his livestock. Ben-Gvir stormed the Ibrahimi Mosque. That's the Abrahamic synagogue. That's where Abraham is supposed to be buried. This is in Hebron with a group of settlers. It was a very, very controversial visit. Arab states rejected it today. I told you there was a lot that happened in the news. Ben-Gvir has made multiple controversial visits to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound as well. This is the third day of Passover. Hussein al-Sheikh is the executive committee secretary and Abbas's closest ally of the Palestinian Authority. And there's now a new position that Abbas just created, where there will be a position of the vice president of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And it's believed that that will be Hussein al-Sheikh. This was just announced by Abbas in March. This comes as Abbas is in his mid-80s, and there is a lot of posturing to see who will be the next head of the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, and Fatah. Currently, all three are headed by Abbas, and it's believed that it will be multiple people in the future. Shaul Arieli is an Israeli researcher who wrote about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and this is really important. Israelis are leaving settlements. Settlements are expanding, and Israelis are leaving them because the number of negative migration cases it's being reported, it's the highest number of migration in 5 years. Israelis are leaving the settlements. They're returning to Israel because of security. This is compounded by unemployment. 62% of the workforce in settlements works inside of Israel. There's more time on the roads. What's happening is the Israelis are squeezing the occupied West Bank, and the settlers are being squeezed too, so they're moving back to Israel. They don't want to spend time on the roads. They don't want to wait at the crossings to Israel. They want higher education, entertainment, cultural life. And so you're seeing not yet a mass exodus, but that was a really important thing I learned today. Just a couple other quick things. In Syria, senior Israeli officials were informed by the U.S. that the U.S. is going to withdraw its troops from Syria in the next 2 months. This is significant because of those ISIS camps that have thousands of ISIS workers, which I thought were manned by the American military. I'll find out more about that. Saudi Arabia is paying off Syria's debts. That's $15 million in arrears. It has to be paid off before the World Bank will approve new grants. So Saudi Arabia is stepping in. Iran and U.S. talks are set to resume next week. In Yemen, pro-government militias are planning a ground offensive targeting the Houthis to try to take advantage of the U.S. that's been bombing. We've been bombing. I don't know if you've heard about the death tolls that the U.S. has caused the last several weeks. Private U.S. security contractors advised the factions on the operation after the UAE, which supports the groups, raised the plan with U.S. officials in recent weeks. Finally, in the U.S., immigration authorities detained Mohsen Maldawai. Sorry, I'm mispronouncing his name. He is another Columbian University student activist. He co-founded the Palestinian advocacy group on campus. He has a green card holder. He went to attend a naturalization appointment at a federal office building and was detained, according to a filing. And it's yet to be seen what will happen in his case. In the case of Mahmoud Khalil, who's friends with Maldawai, Mahmoud Khalil, in part, it's believed that the federal government based its decision to deport him in part on unverified tabloid articles and erroneous information. NBC reported that today. And several international students who've had their visas revoked in recent weeks have filed challenges for revocations, arguing that the government lacked a justification. So that is an update of news from here in Jerusalem. May we continue to pray and work for peace as this Holy Week continues, a week of lament during Jesus's passion. May God go before us in the name of Christ. Amen.